May God bless your day and your week ahead as you join us for this deep dive.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So imagine being gifted with just unparalleled superhuman strength, like completely invincible.
Right, like a comic book character.
Exactly. But you have absolutely zero emotional control. I mean, you are functionally invincible, but you're completely governed by your own immediate selfish impulses.
Which is a terrifying combination, honestly.
It really is. And today, for you listening, we are looking at what has to be the ultimate flawed hero story. We're pulling from excerpts of two very distinct, incredibly detailed study Bibles.
Yes, the Holman Study Bible and the NWA, which is the Nova Almeida Actualizada.
Right. And we are zeroing in entirely on one specific, just incredibly chaotic chapter, which is Judges chapter 14.
And it is arguably one of the most action-packed and honestly morally complicated texts in the entire historical narrative.
Oh, definitely.
To really understand what is happening here, you, the listener, you have to grasp the overarching question these study Bibles are wrestling with.
The big paradox, right.
Exactly. How can a text hold two completely opposing truths at once? You have a protagonist making entirely self-centered, frankly, sinful choices.
Just terrible decisions, one after another.
Right. Yet simultaneously, there is this divine plan actively orchestrating a broader outcome through those exact flaws.
Yeah, and I want to dig into how those mechanics actually work. Because reading through this, it feels like a high-speed train derailing in slow motion.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
So let's set the scene. We open Judges 14, and our protagonist, Samson, goes down to a place called Timnah, and he sees a Philistine woman, goes back home, and essentially just demands that his parents arrange a marriage.
No negotiation, just a demand.
Yeah. And his reasoning isn't, diplomatic or strategic. He simply says, she pleases my eyes. Or, as the study notes point out, the literal translation is, she is right in my eyes.
Which really tells you a lot about his internal decision-making process right out of the gate. I mean, it is purely surface level.
Totally shallow.
Right. And the NWA notes provide some really essential geographical and cultural context here, just to help you understand why this is such a provocative move.
Oh, lay it on us.
So Timnah, which is located at modern-day Tel Batash, sits down in the Jephthah Valley. During the period of the Judges, so the Iron Age, this was a highly prosperous Philistine city.
Okay, so it's a nice area.
Very nice. The excavations show impressive fortifications, brick buildings on stone foundations. So it's wealthy territory, but critically, it is enemy territory.
Right, because Israel is currently under the oppressive domination of the Philistines at this point.
Exactly. And more importantly, marriages with foreign unbelievers were strictly forbidden for Israelites.
Yeah, the notes cross-reference this with Exodus 34 and Deuteronomy 7. Like, it is a hard rule.
A very hard rule.
And, okay, let's unpack this, because it feels like watching the main character in a horror movie walk into the dark basement. Yeah. Like you're yelling at the screen, don't do it. His parents are right there objecting. They point out that it's against the rules. They ask him, isn't there a woman among our own people? Why go to the uncircumcised Philistines?
And that objection from his parents, it highlights this really deliberate contrast the Holman notes bring up.
Oh, with the previous judges?
Right. The text is basically begging the reader to compare Samson's choice of a bride with the ideal standards set earlier in the book of Judges by someone like Othniel.
Othniel was the very first judge.
Exactly. Othniel won his bride, Asa, through this act of courageous faith, conquering a Canaanite city, and he married within his own covenant community.
He did it the right way.
He did. Samson, on the other hand, is demanding a woman simply because she looks good to him. It represents just a total lack of spiritual discipline.
Well, I need to push back on that, though.
Okay, go ahead.
Because that brings us to verse 4, which is the detail I've honestly been struggling to wrap my head around all week.
The divine twist.
Yeah. The text explicitly states that Samson's parents didn't know this demand was actually from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. So, if God's covenant rules strictly forbid marrying foreign unbelievers, how does the text justify God actively using that exact sin to further a divine plan? I mean, isn't that a massive theological contradiction?
That is the core theological tension of the entire Samson narrative right there. How does divine sovereignty interact with human free will?
It's a huge question.
It is. And the study Bibles are very careful to explain that God is not coercing Samson to sin.
Well,
God doesn't, inject Samson with a sinful desire for a Philistine woman. Samson owns that completely.
So Samson is just being Samson.
Exactly. However, God, in his sovereignty, is leveraging Samson's rebellious assimilation to create friction. You see, the Israelites at this time had become entirely too comfortable being ruled by the Philistines.
Oh, so there was no resistance at all.
None. There was this toxic peace. So God uses the very thing that is wrong, Samson's desire to integrate with the enemy, to initiate a violent disruption of that peace.
Wow. So it's not God authoring the sin, but God utilizing the inevitable fallout of that sin.
Precisely. And the Holman notes use this phrase that captures the trajectory beautifully. They note that Samson descended geographically and spiritually when he went down to Timnah.
Oh, I love that connection.
Yeah, his physical journey down into the valley is a literal manifestation of his spiritual descent away from his calling.
So if his internal discipline is slipping, it doesn't take long for that to manifest externally. And that leads us right into his first violent encounter on the road.
The lion.
Yes, Samson is walking past the vineyards toward Timnah, and a young lion roars at him and attacks.
And this is where we see the first real display of his unique gifting.
Right. The text says the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him mightily, and he literally tears the lion apart barehanded, as easily as someone might tear apart a young goat.
Which is just a staggering image of physical power.
It really is. But then he does something that completely baffled me on the first read. He doesn't tell his parents what just happened.
He keeps it a complete secret.
Yeah. Later, he returns, he checks the lion's carcass, and he finds that a swarm of bees has built a hive inside the ribcage. And there's honey. He scoops it out, eats it as he walks, and then gives some to his parents. But again, he aggressively hides where the honey came from.
Yeah.
I mean, why? Human nature dictates that if you tear a lion apart with your bare hands, you are going to brag about it. Right?
Even so, yeah.
So why the cover-up?
Well, to understand that, you have to understand the mechanics of his specific calling. The sources emphasize that Samson is a Nazarite.
Okay, a Nazarite.
Now, a Nazarite vow was a sacred oath of dedication to God, and it came with incredibly strict physical boundaries. One of the absolute heaviest restrictions was that a Nazarite must never come into contact with a dead body.
And we aren't just talking about like a hygiene issue here, right? This is about ritual purity.
Exactly. In the ancient Near East, death was considered the ultimate ritual impurity. It was fundamentally incompatible with the presence and holiness of God.
Wow.
So by reaching into the rotting carcass of that lion, Samson isn't just breaking some minor rule, he is rendering himself ritually profane.
He's contaminating himself.
Completely. He is entirely disregarding the physical boundaries that set him apart for divine service. And worse, by feeding that honey to his parents without telling them its origin, he is unwittingly contaminating them too.
That is, it's like watching a surgeon deliberately refuse to wash their hands before operating on a patient.
That's a great analogy.
Like, he has the necessary tools, but he is willfully contaminating the entire process because he simply doesn't care about the protocol.
That is a perfect way to look at it. He possesses incredible power, but he has absolutely zero of the discipline required to steward it.
He's just doing whatever feels good.
Right. He is governed entirely by his appetites. First, it was the woman who was right in his eyes, and now, the honey that tasted sweet in the moment.
So if he's willing to secretly compromise his most sacred vows when he's completely alone on the road, the real test is what happens when he's performing for an audience.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the wedding banquet. Samson throws this massive feast for 30 Philistine men who were assigned by the bride's family to basically be his companions.
And here is where a really crucial linguistic detail from the NAA study notes completely reframes how we should visualize this scene.
Okay, I love linguistic details.
So the Hebrew word used for this specific banquet is mishta.
Which means what exactly? Like a dinner party?
It specifically denotes a feast centered around the heavy consumption of alcoholic drinks.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a drinking party.
Wait, but alcohol's another direct violation of the Nazarite vow.
Yes, it is. Alongside avoiding dead bodies and not cutting their hair, Nazarites were strictly forbidden from consuming any product of the grapevine. So, no wine, no grapes, no raisins.
Nothing.
Nothing. So by hosting a mishta, Samson is publicly and blatantly breaking yet another one of his sacred vows.
He's just checking them off the list.
He really is. He is throwing a massive drinking party with the very people oppressing his nation.
Man, the environment is already highly volatile, but Samson decides to escalate things. Here's where it gets really interesting. He challenges these 30 new Philistine companions with a riddle.
A haida in Hebrew.
A haida, okay.
And the notes explain that this wasn't just a casual party trick. Riddles were a very common, highly formalized, ancient test of wits.
Like a cultural staple.
Exactly. For example, the Queen of Sheba used this exact same word when she brought hard questions to test King Solomon's wisdom. It was a high-stakes cultural game.
And you have to remember, the stakes here are staggering. Samson wagers 30 linen tunics and 30 changes of clothes.
Which is a fortune.
Yeah, for you listening, 30 changes of custom Iron Age clothing isn't just a quick trip to a local department store. That is an enormous amount of wealth.
Very true.
If they win, Samson has to pay up. If Samson wins, they have to outfit him. And they have the 7 days of the wedding feast to figure it out. So what's the riddle?
Well, the riddle is entirely based on his secret sin with the lion. He tells them, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet.
Which is fundamentally impossible for them to solve.
It is entirely rigged.
Right.
The notes emphasize that this riddle violates the basic social contract of riddle telling because it's based on a private, unshared experience.
There's no way they could know.
There are no cultural or logical context clues for them to decipher. It's an inside joke with himself.
He's mocking them. And the Philistines quickly realize they are being played, which leads to a massive panic. I noticed something a bit confusing in the text notes here about the timeline, though.
Ah, the manuscript differences.
Yeah. Depending on the manuscript tradition, the translations differ on when the Philistines actually retaliate. Some say it happens on the 4th day, others say the 7th. Why the discrepancy?
Let's unpack that because it really shows how ancient scribes wrestled with the text. The older Greek translation, the Septuagint, says they threatened the bride on the 4th day. However, the traditional Hebrew Masoretic text implies it happened on the 7th day. The discrepancy likely arises because scribes were trying to harmonize the logic of the narrative.
How so?
Well, if the bride cries and begs Samson for the entire 7 days of the feast, as the text later says, the Philistines must have threatened her earlier than the 7th day.
Right, that makes logical sense.
But regardless of the exact day the threat is issued, the escalation is just brutal and absolute.
It goes from a tense cultural game to a literal hostage situation. These 30 men corner Samson's new bride and basically tell her, persuade your husband to explain the riddle to us, or we will burn you and your father's house down.
They accuse her of inviting them to the wedding specifically to impoverish them and rob them of their property.
So driven by the very real threat of being burned alive by her own people, the bride turns her desperation onto Samson.
She weaponizes her emotions.
Yeah, she weeps before him continuously.
She manipulates him, saying, you hate me, you don't really love me, you gave my people a riddle and haven't told me the answer.
And Samson actually tries to hold his ground at first. He points out, look, I haven't even told my own father or mother, why would I tell you?
Which is deeply ironic.
So ironic, considering he actively contaminated his parents with the honey without telling them.
Right.
But eventually the pressure is just too much. On the 7th day, worn down by her relentless nagging, he caves. He gives her the answer.
And of course, she immediately goes and tells her people to save her own life.
It is a profound betrayal, but it's born entirely out of the impossible, violent situation Samson himself created.
Exactly.
So right before the sun sets on the 7th day, literally at the final hour before Samson wins the wager, the men of the city come to him. And they deliver the answer in this incredibly smug, poetic form.
Oh, they are so arrogant about it.
They really are. They say, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?
Because he knows that they cheated.
Yeah. And Samson's response is so visceral. He snaps back with his own crude poetry. He says, if you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have discovered my riddle.
We really need to pause on that phrase because modern ears might completely miss just how toxic it is.
Please explain, because it sounds awful.
It is. The sources confirm that referring to his wife as a heifer and talking about other men plowing with her is a highly offensive, culturally degraded idiom.
It sounds like it strips her of all humanity.
It does. It reduces her to livestock. Furthermore, plowing with another man's heifer heavily implies sexual infidelity, or at the very least, a deeply inappropriate intimacy and disloyalty.
Wow.
It is a gross public insult directed at his wife. It shows just how rapidly his supposed love, which was only ever based on her pleasing his eyes, turns to sheer venom when his ego is bruised.
He is furious. I mean, he's been betrayed, he's lost the wager, and now he owes these men 30 sets of expensive clothes that he simply does not have the money to buy.
No, he doesn't.
So what happens? The text says the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon upon Samson a second time.
And this is exactly where the personal vengeance of Samson and the overarching divine purpose collide most violently.
He storms down to Ashkelon, which is another major Philistine city miles away. He slaughters 30 men there, strips them of their clothes, and brings those blood-soaked garments back to Timnah to pay off his debt to the men who solved the riddle.
Just a completely gruesome scene.
Yeah. Then, burning with anger, he abandons his new bride entirely and goes back to his father's house.
And the chaos doesn't even end there. Because he abandons her, his father-in-law assumes Samson hates her, so he gives Samson's bride to his best man, the companion who attended him at the wedding.
The whole arrangement just collapses into total humiliation and violence.
It really does.
We are looking at a massive wake of destruction. A dead lion, shattered sacred vows, a ruined marriage, and 30 murdered men in Ashkelon. So we have to ask the ultimate question. How does a man doing all of this fit into a divine plan?
Right.
What is the actual trajectory of his life, and how do the study Bibles map this out?
This is where the NAA source material provides a truly illuminating and frankly chilling piece of analysis.
I found this part so fascinating.
They include a chart titled The 10 Deeds of Strength and Heroism of Samson. And when you look closely at the data across the entirety of Samson's life, a very clear, haunting pattern emerges regarding how God operates with a flawed vessel.
Walk us through the mechanics of that chart, because this was the most profound realization for me in the entire study.
So the chart is perfectly split in half. The 10 miraculous feats are divided into 2 segments of 5. In the first 5 of Samson's feats, which includes tearing the lion apart and the assassination of the 30 men at Ashkelon that we just explored, the text explicitly and repeatedly mentions the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him to empower the action.
Right, it's a constant refrain early on. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him mightily. God is actively engaging.
Exactly. But in the latter 5 feats of his life, events that happen later in his narrative, like carrying away the heavy doors of the city gate of Gaza, or snapping the fresh bowstrings when he's tied up, and eventually pulling down the pillars of the temple in his final act of destruction, the text completely drops any mention of God's Spirit rushing upon him.
It just disappears.
It disappears. The theological implication here is staggering. The text is showing us a man who is acting entirely on his own selfish, vengeful impulses, and as a result, he is slowly spiraling out of contact with God.
Wow.
The source notes highlight that in the second half of his life, he is operating purely on momentum and ego. He thinks he still has divine backing, but God has actually stepped back, allowing Samson's own chaotic choices to carry him forward.
That is just wild to think about.
And it culminates eventually in the terrifying moment later in the book where the text explicitly states the Lord had left him and Samson didn't even know it.
That is the terrifying reality of spiritual drift. He is just acting out of sheer momentum. But even in that downward spiral, even when he's murdering people in Ashkelon just to pay off a gambling debt, the divine purpose of disrupting the Philistines is still happening.
Yes. The text forces the reader to hold a profound paradox. Samson is sinning. He is actively breaking his Nazirite vows. He is marrying outside the covenant. He is treating people like disposable property, and he is acting out of pure ego.
Yep.
Yet God is actively using these exact messy, selfish flaws to initiate a necessary judgment against the Philistines who were comfortably oppressing Israel. It asks you, the listener, to reconsider how broader purposes can be achieved even through deeply flawed, entirely free human actions.
So what does this all mean for you listening? To me, it shows a completely unvarnished, unsanitized look at history.
Oh, absolutely.
The study Bibles aren't trying to cover for Samson. They don't pretend his actions were righteous or noble. The text exposes his absolute messiness.
It really does.
It shows a guy who had every single physical and spiritual advantage, but possessed no moral compass. And yet it maintains that a grander narrative, a divine plan of deliverance, is still moving forward despite him. God uses flawed humans, but the humans themselves still suffer the devastating consequences of their own spiritual drift.
It is a powerful testament to the idea that human failure doesn't necessarily derail divine intention. God's plan to disrupt the Philistine occupation didn't begin with a righteous, holy military campaign.
No, it didn't.
It began with a stubborn young man wanting a woman he shouldn't have, getting furious over a rigged riddle, and seeking petty revenge.
Which leaves us with a lot to chew on. As we wrap up this deep dive into Judges 14, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought based on the trajectory of the sources we've examined today. Given that Samson acted entirely out of petty revenge, out of personal grievance over a ruined wedding, a stolen wife, and a rigged riddle.
Yeah.
Did he ever actually realize, in the moment, that he was an instrument of divine judgment? Or did he go to his grave thinking this was all just his own personal drama?
That is a fascinating question.
Thank you so much for exploring this text with us. God bless all the listeners.
Yeah.